Our prelude today is a cantata by the 17th century German composer Johann Sebastian Bach and is titled Sleeper's Wake. It'll be performed on the piano by our member Trudy Poyman. Our opening words are by the 17th century poet and preacher, John Donne. No man is an island entire of itself. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. The opening hymn is an American spiritual titled Let the Life I've Lived and is performed by the People Choir and performed in Brattleboro, Vermont. The lyrics are very simple, so if you'd like to sing along, you're very welcome to.
Let the life I've lived speak for me. Let the life I've lived speak for me. When I come to the end of this road and I lay down my heavy load, let the life I've lived speak for me.
Let the friends I've made,
Let the friends I've made speak for me. Let the friends I've made speak for me. When I come to the end of this road and I lay down my heavy load, let the friends I've made speak for me.
let the work I do,
Let the work I do speak for me. Let the work I do speak for me. When I come to the end of this road and I lay down my heavy load, let the work I do speak for me.
let the love I've shared,
Let the love I've shared
We are here to do honor to Arthur Aldrich, who has died. We are here because in one way or another, this death affects us all. And now will you please join me in a moment of prayer? We lift our hearts in search of the inward resources we need to face life's varied experiences of joy and sorrow. At a time when one to whom we have been joined by ties of kinship and love has been taken by death, we seek the peace of acceptance. We give thanks for the enrichment that has been ours through our shared experiences of friendship and understanding, our commitment to common causes and endeavors with the one whose loss we mourn today. May the words and feelings and remembrances we share in these quiet moments strengthen us in our sympathy and support for one another, and renew our dedication to those underlying and eternal realities which alone give our lives meaning and worth. And together, let the congregation say, Amen. Today's psalm is Psalm 23. We'll read it responsively. You can find it in the back of our hymnal. Many of you should have a gray hymnal on your seats. The reading is number 642. Number 642 in the back of the hymnal. I'll begin the reading and I invite you to read the italicized verses. And again, that's number 642. You are my shepherd, I shall not want. You guide me in the paths of righteousness, for you are righteous. You spread a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You soothe my head with oil. My cup runs over. We will now have a hymn performed by our choir.
Sweet the rain to fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first to fall on the first rise. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, strong in completeness, where God's being has. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, Lord of the one light, being so blessed. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Today's reading is from the 22nd chapter of the book of Ecclesiasticus. Written in the 2nd century before the Common Era, it is the largest book of wisdom literature from antiquity to have survived. And this particular passage reminds us that while the death of a dear one is to be mourned, we who live should endeavor to live our lives with wisdom and prudence. Listen then to these words. Weep for the dead, for he has left the light behind, And weep for the fool, for he has left intelligence behind. Weep less bitterly for the dead, for he is at rest. But the life of the fool is worse than death. Mourning for the dead lasts 7 days, but for the foolish or the corrupt, it lasts all the days of their lives. Here endeth the reading.
I begin my tribute by acknowledging that I didn't know Art for very long. I began my ministry here in January, and until April, it was completely virtual due to the pandemic. I have fond recollections of seeing Art and Elaine sitting together side by side on Sunday morning on Zoom, faithful in their attendance and participation in our Sunday services. I feel grateful and touched that I was able to visit Art in the hospital a few days before he died. And I am also grateful and touched by all that I have learned about him, and I look forward to hearing more about him through the memories which will be shared aloud in a few minutes by family and friends. As a pastor and a mental health clinician, I want to recognize that though it has been a few weeks since Art's death, that whatever feelings of grief people may be feeling are normal, and that there's no timeline one must follow. It's my hope that this service will be a comfort to you as you cope with feelings of loss, sadness, disbelief, anger, or despair. The walls of this church have absorbed the prayers and grief of many people over the decades, and our hearts are open to one another as we mourn the loss of a cherished member. Though we wish that things were different, the reality is that while death deprives us of the presence of our loved ones, death is also what gives us meaning in our existence, because it reminds us of what a precious gift life is. The reading from Ecclesiasticus reminds us of that truth in its own whimsical way. Though the dead are to be mourned, it is actually the living fool who is to really be mourned, which is a way of saying that those of us who are alive should consider our own mortality and think about the kind of life we want to live and what kind of legacy we would like to leave after our own passing. The virtues of the person who lives with wisdom include honesty, kindness, generosity, humility, tenacity, faithfulness, mercy, and discipline. I know from conversations with others that Art was very faithful in his dedication to this congregation and his family and his work, and that he was generous with his knowledge, expertise, and time. We weep for Art who has left the light behind. And as people who still have breath in us, let us endeavor to follow the path of wisdom and not of the fool, so that when the bell tolls for us, we can be confident that the life we've lived speaks accurately for us. I now invite Arthur Jr. to deliver his tribute, and afterwards others will be invited to deliver their tributes, and you can do that right here from the pulpit.
I'll say this, it's impossible to sum up, my dad's life in a few minutes that I'll talk here today. He was just a huge figure, a huge presence. And so I've edited, my remarks down to about 8 hours. And then part 2 will be next week if you come back. To say that my dad was a unique individual, it would be an understatement. Some might say he was quirky. Other people say things that I can't really repeat here about him. Nothing in his life was easy. He had adversity all through his life, including, living in the post-Depression time. Growing up in that time had a big influence on, his values and his way of life. This is no lie. He walked 3 miles to school every day, uphill, in the rain, barefoot. No, just kidding. That last part was not true. He had one shoe. My dad had this ability to really filter out his distractors. He could ignore obstacles that were in his way, and he just didn't care if you thought poorly of him. He had that ability just to sort of ignore all of that noise, and it let him really just go where he wanted to go, and nothing was going to stop him. They tell me when I was little that my nickname was Tiger. Thankfully, my dad's parenting style was not like Earl Woods. That's Tiger Woods' dad. Look it up if you don't know. It's much funnier if I don't have to explain all the jokes. My dad was, he parented with like the right balance of support and encouragement. He gave me just enough rope to almost hang myself. And then he would always be there to help out, at the end. And usually it was something like, why the hell would you do that? But it really gave me a good foundation for, having confidence in myself. And he always told me, clean up your own mess. So I take those with me. He led by example. He never did things himself that he would ask other people to do. If he asked you to do it, he had already done it himself in the past. He trusted people. He took you at your word. A handshake and your actions were good enough for him. He was probably trusting to a fault. But that was my dad. He had no prejudice. He had no political agenda. He wasn't looking to get revenge. It just wasn't part of his DNA. What you saw in my dad was what you got. And the thing about my dad was that you knew exactly where you stood with him because he would just tell you, like, no, like that's terrible. Or, there's no sugarcoating it. And, in that regard, he was a terrible poker player. He didn't care about the accolades. He didn't care about awards. All he really cared about was doing good work, whether that's at the church, at the newspaper, in the community. That was all that mattered to him, was just being a good human. When I was young, it was very difficult for me to share the same name with my dad. There was all kinds of confusion, the telephone especially. My kids probably don't know this, but back in the day, we only had one telephone and we had to share it. And why my poor mother thought that young girls were calling for my dad, I'll never know. But the phone always went to him first. So that was, not a great part of being an Arthur Jr. Growing up, we lived in this development, a new development in 67. They moved in Suffern called Squires Gate. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors very closely. You knew when they got up, when they were brushing their teeth, when they flushed the toilet. And that's true. You can ask a few of the people in the crowd here who grew up there. My dad, he would entertain the neighbors unintentionally. Every Sunday morning, he would stroll out to the end of the driveway in his underwear to get the Sunday paper. And it wasn't like a quick dash. He would run out there, or he would stroll out there, really. He'd look at the headline, see what the lead story was, as the neighbors were preparing to call the cops. And then he would saunter back to the house, just not caring what people thought. Growing up in this neighborhood, you always saw lots of repairmen around the neighborhood, plumbers and electricians and painters. but not in my house. Some of the earliest memories I have are my dad underneath something like the dishwasher with parts strewn out all over the floor, or he's on a ladder taking something apart. He never owned something that he hadn't taken apart at least once. It was just his way. Occasionally, we did have some trucks at our house, sometimes the fire department, the hazmat unit, and one time the SWAT team was there. No, I'm kidding. It was the FBI. My dad's favorite night, though, of the month was junk night. He would prowl the neighborhood and he would just collect whatever people were throwing out, radios, TVs, vacuum cleaners. I mean, you know, he just would fix them. That's it. That's the end of the story. He would just fix them. So if you need some small appliances, I have them in my trunk out in the parking lot. I think, you know, he wanted my mom to have a vacuum cleaner in every part of the house. But my mom never vacuumed a day in her life. So as my dad would say, that really sucked. Listen, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. But I do remember he had this lair. It was like his bat cave in the basement. It was a little room. It wasn't really a workshop because it was much more dangerous. There were knives and tools and microphones, and I actually remember seeing, you know, what was a flatbed film editor, and he was doing some, you know, basic film editing, and something about seeing that must have clicked in me because that became my career path. And he just loved that sort of stuff. He loved to learn, he loved to teach, and he loved to entertain. I think the happiest I remember him, you know, seeing him was when he was behind the organ. He loved to play the organ. Many people don't know, but before there was the Partridge Family, we had a little family thing called the Happy Organ, and my dad would take us on this road show during the summer. He'd book us into campgrounds, and he would entertain the campground audience like one night a week in exchange for a vacation. So he thought it was great. I was, you know, a little mortified by the whole thing, but therapy and drugs have helped. But he was in his glory at that time, and that was just, you know, that was his happy place, was the organ. What he did leave me with, you know, was confidence in myself to, you know, to follow my dreams. You know, he had no regrets. He never looked back. He was always just striving for the next thing. And you have to enjoy what you have, you know, with you. Don't get hung up on material possessions. And I hope that I can pass these traits down to my kids. Listen, learn. Alec and Daniel here in the front row. There will never be another like my dad. I mean, he was a true Renaissance man. The best that I can do is try to honor his legacy by just doing what I do. So, thank you, Dad.
I don't do public speaking very well, but bear with me. But I want to tell you a little bit about my husband that maybe some of you don't know. The happiest time of my life, or on 3 occasions. The first was when he married Christina, and I met her and her family, James and her mother, up at Mount Fuji. And Christina was lovable from the very beginning, but he also had a sense of humor, and he did lots of puns. But the second happiest moment was when Daniel was born, and he was the first one. And the second one was Alex. And now Daniel is driving, and he drives me home when we're visiting Arthur. And Alex is great. He helps me out of the car and helps me up the stairs. And things are changing. And even his father when he was in a nursing home, he would always have puns or little funny jokes. He would be walking with a wheelchair, and he would say to anyone he met on the way, "Tennis, anyone?" And somebody said, "Well, what's your name?" And he said, "I don't know, but if you go to the front desk, they'll tell you." Although Arthur was very much like his father, I think he learned everything he knew from his father. But when Christina and Arthur always were very good to me, but after Arthur died, Christina, I don't know if she's here, she was remarkable. She did all the shopping and stayed with me the first night. And I was so overworked, I couldn't do much of anything. But I had lots of friends and neighbors, people from the Unitarian, people I've known for a long time, like Heidi, neighbors, you friends, and a lot of cards, which I can't even go into. But, we all have to die sometime. But I was younger and I thought I would go first. But we don't get that choice in life. When your time is up, it's up. And I'll always miss him and love him. That's all I have to say.
I'd like to thank the Reverend Mark for this beautiful and thoughtful service. And it's really great to see everyone here. My name is Jean Migdal, and I'm Art and Elaine Aldrich's favorite niece. Their only niece, okay, but I'm the favorite. He has a nephew too, whom you'll hear from. I wanted to share some of my thoughts and memories of my uncle with you. I was a young girl when my Aunt Elaine met the love of her life, Art Aldrich. I remember when they got engaged, and especially recall the birthday gift he gave me before they wed. It was a 1936 edition of the complete works of Shakespeare, illustrated by Rockwell Kent. Some of you may know that edition. As a young teen, I'd certainly heard of Romeo and Juliet, but it would be a few more years before I'd read The Bard. Nonetheless, I knew that book was special, and I delighted in Kent's detailed and whimsical illustrations. The complete works went to college with me, and I always felt that, my Uncle Art was with me, and I would often call him to discuss something from a history class or a current event. That book has a place of pride on my bookshelf, even in the digital age. One of the few books that I have left, it's still with me. For me, my Uncle Art personified gravitas. He presided over my mom's memorial and wove the memory of our stories, photos, and film clips. This congregation was important to him and our family. Over the years, I've met many of you, my aunt and uncle's dear friends. We held my mom's 75th birthday party here. And recently I heard my uncle's talk on tribalism and gun control during Unitarian services. My Uncle Art had an incomparable life of the mind, but as you heard from Arthur, he liked to tinker and repair things. As you all probably know, but I love saying it, he was a publisher, journalist, professor, theater director, radio commentator, pianist, organist, a Renaissance man who read voraciously and understood history with depth and compassion. He influenced and inspired me my entire life. He was at ease intertwining his deep knowledge of history and literature with a dash of humor that for me made the world go round. I will always miss him, his voice, his wit, his informed perspective. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael Migdal. I am Arthur's nephew, cousin of young Arthur, as we call him. I also, it's funny listening to my sister Jean and Arthur. We did not collaborate on what we were going to say, but they seem to have some common themes. I wanted to focus on how, when I think of my Uncle Art, he was always generous. He would share his music, his knowledge, and his time. And a lot of you know that he played the piano here in the Unitarian Church, and he also volunteered in the lobby of the Good Samaritan Hospital, playing the piano to comfort people in what's often a stressful time. As my cousin Art mentioned, he also played the organ, the electric organ, which he had at home. And, one of the memories I wanted to share was just when the family would get together for holidays, for Christmas in particular, my uncle would sit at the organ, we would gather, oops, sorry, hit the mic. We would gather around the organ, the electric organ in the basement, and he would flip the switch and you would hear this electric hum, which always meant that the fun and the music was about to start. And he would play Christmas songs for us. And he had these books of sheet music that he would let us kids go through, and any song we wanted to play that we could find in the book, he would play. And it was just wonderful. And you could always see him, you could see that he was happy playing these songs for us and sharing his music. And I just always remember that. And the thing about those family get-togethers is that they tended to be all-day affairs. And when you have an all-day affair, there tend to be moments where nobody's really doing anything. And my uncle never wanted to waste time, would always pull out a book. He always had a book to read. And he was always teaching himself things and learning things. A number of old family photos, you see him with a book in the corner. And he had a reputation in the family of knowing just about something about just about everything. He was the one to go to if you wanted to learn about home repairs, about politics, society, cars. He knew. And when he would explain things to you, and I'm sure you've seen this, he would get this smile on his face. He loved teaching. He loved to explain things. And when he saw that you were starting to understand, the grin would grow even broader. Speaking of his knowledge about cars in particular, I just wanted to share this experience I had where he rescued me. This was back in about probably 89 or 90, and it was the winter at the end of a Christmas break. I was driving on a Friday back to college in upstate New York when my engine started to overheat. I was about 90 minutes north of Suffern at the time. And I pulled over. I was towed by somebody that was patrolling the area to a garage that was not going to be open until Monday. So I'm here at a garage with the tow truck guy. I don't remember if I had a cell phone or if I used a payphone, but I did not know what to do. And when you didn't know what to do, you called Uncle Art. That's who he was in our family, and I suspect to many of you. So he was able to, well, let me step back a second. He knew cars, but I think the reason that he knew cars was because he he bought old cars. His thing was old cars. And I think the way my uncle looked at things in both life and with cars was that if something went wrong, it was an opportunity to learn something. And let's just say that with the kind of cars that he had a lot of learning experiences. And those were very helpful. So when I had a problem, I called him. He was able to diagnose over the phone what was wrong and how serious it was. And I still remember him asking exactly where I was, saying, "Stay there, I'm gonna come get you." And he drove about 3 hours round trip, got me, had my car towed to his mechanic who was gonna be open on Saturday. I stayed overnight at Uncle Art and Anna Lane's house, and thanks to Uncle Art and his mechanic, I was on my way the next day, and I did not need to miss any classes. That to me really epitomizes Uncle Art. It's something I was always grateful to him for, and it just shows to me a perfect example of how he was always helping others. I mean, that was Uncle Art. He was always happy to play a song for you, to teach you something, to jump in and figure out something to help you out. So to conclude, I would just tell you that to me, my uncle will always be a generous, humane, and smiling example of a great person. Thank you.
As you can tell, I'm a member of the congregation here. I've only been a member of this congregation for 20 years, so in terms of arts generation, I'm pretty much a newcomer, but I still feel I have something to say. I found Art was a Renaissance man. I mean, or Renaissance, I don't know. He had so many interests. Our Town, which is the local free newspaper in Pearl River where I live, he was the editor of that. And he wrote some pretty good articles. I went to, in the Jewish Center, there's these classes that they put on for mainly seniors. And one of the presenters was Art Aldrich, talking about movies in the Nazi era in Germany. And he was very enlightening about that. You know, he kind of explained that whereas in American war movies, the hero makes it through to the end, in German war heroes, they never did. And this is maybe why the war went on as long as it did. Here in the church, he was always working on the infrastructure, and his theatrical experience can be seen all around us, where why have 2 spotlights when you can have 12? And one of the people here said he was a doer, not a talker. And I remember just barely 2 years ago, Art was out in the parking lot eyeing one of the light poles. And Elaine said to me, "If he wants to go for the ladder, stop him." And finally, I will miss his thunderous performance on the piano. He had a pretty good left hand. And what it meant was that our pop-up choir, which you saw, had the confidence to take on anything, because we knew we had Art's pounding accompaniment behind us. So I'm really going to miss that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim Murphy. I'm a fellow Rotarian with Art, known him about 12 or 15 years. I was not going to say anything, because who am I to speak in front of people who know him so well, but just the spirit of this and the jokiness. I remember 2 things about Art. In Rotary, you wanted to sit with Art because you never knew what you were going to learn, what he was going to say, and it was always fun. Well, one day I was at lunch and I was trying to impress Art that I'm pretty smart too. So we were talking about cultural things, and I was saying that what the Hava Nagila is to Jewish people the Ave Maria is to Irish Catholic people. And he looked at me and he said, the Schubert or the Bach? I thought, just absolutely been nailed. The other thing that I remember, and I will always remember this the rest of my life, he did a program. And I now know that Andrew Lloyd Webber stole the theme from Phantom of the Opera from Pink Floyd. Thank you.
I did want to comment. What I have to say about Art is really just repeating what everyone else said, but in a slightly different form. Oh, by the way, my name is Harry Scher. One thing that's true about the Unitarian Society of Rockland is that there are a lot of talkers. There are a lot of people who have opinions, and Art was probably one of the most. But Art was different from most of us in that when he talked, he made sense so much of the time, so much more than the rest of us. And he was an example to us all. Thank you.
Okay. I used to write articles for our town. And one of the really amazing things about Art that was mentioned before was his puns. He would get on the phone we talk about articles, and it was like, I couldn't stop laughing. Well, I wanted him to stop so I could know what he wanted me to do so I could get to work and get it done on deadline. And but he was punning away. And that's it. He was a really great person and the most knowledgeable man I've ever met. And I feel honored that I knew him and that he hired me.
And this is Gail Lavender. I can't really follow what Jean had said or what the nephew had said, but I agree with all of those things and probably more. He was an amazing person. He was a very special person. He will be sorely missed in the congregation. And my regret, if there is to have one, is that I didn't know him any better. Thank you.
I don't know how many people remember, but about 30 years ago, Arthur was very critically ill and we almost lost him. He had about a 10% chance of making it and he made it. I think just his willpower to not leave his family. It was remarkable to me. And the other thing, everybody mentions the music and he could play anything, but his heart really was with show music. And one time a church donated a big organ here and he was in his glory. He would come 2 or 3 times a week when no one was here and play the organ over and over, his show music. I call it his Phantom of the Opera era. And we've lost so much in Art. We have a lot of intellectuals here, but he was an intellectual with a sense of humor. And he was so caring to everyone who ever knew him. And I think we can all attest to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to just express my gratitude to Art for all he did for the congregation and for me. For a number of years, I served on the board of worship at the congregation. And there were so many times when I was trying to help put together a service that Art was very generous to me and would help me put together some of these presentations involving multimedia. And he was so talented and skilled, and he took the time to sit with me and work through the technical issues and also with content. And it was just so nice to have someone like that I could rely on and get help from. And he did it so naturally, and it was nothing to him to spend time and even invite me to his house to work on the stuff and upload and download all these video clips that we were going to put on in the service. He also invited me to his radio program that he hosted at a local radio station and interviewed me about law and being a judge. I was a local judge for a while, and it was just wonderful to have someone like that as a member of your congregation and a friend. And I'm really grateful for Art and all he's done for us.
I don't like talking in front of people, but I can't let the day go by without saying something. I'm Christina, his daughter-in-law. I didn't know the Rotary side of my father-in-law or the Unitarian side. All I saw was the father-in-law side, and the way he treated his niece, nephew, and especially his wife and son. I couldn't have imagined marrying somebody that would have had a better role model to live up to and to follow as example. My mother-in-law and father-in-law she is still the best. They do anything for anybody, and I just can't imagine how it's going to be without him. He was really a wonderful man, and we'll miss him. His puns will continue. My husband and my boys constantly, but I'm going to miss him. I have to say, he was a wonderful man.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm short. Let me adjust this. That was one problem Art never had. Anyway, I am delighted to say that I am the outgoing chair of the Board of Trustees. And Art was the outgoing of everything, worship, buildings and grounds, trustees, you name it, he did everything. And Annie and I worked for a while together at the Journal News before she found the light and went to work with Art. But I've got to tell you, one of the reasons I ended up at the Journal News was because of Art. And here's the funny thing, it was because of my ignorance. In 1982, in July, I was in the back there having coffee and was talking with Elaine and Art, and we got that common base of, oh yeah, we're both journalists. So he starts talking about his boss. You don't want to work for my boss. My boss is terrible. And he kept going on and on and on with all these pejoratives. And I thought, okay, I've been duly warned. And so I ended up over at the Journal News. It wasn't until years later I found out he was talking about himself.
Hi, my name is Lydia Coates, and I want to say a few things about Art. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity, which he gave me, to write a column for his paper called Not Just Women's Issues. And when I first called him and posed the idea to him, he said, well, what is this going to be about? So I said, well, I want to focus on women's issues, but not just women's issues. And he said, perfect, that's the name of the column. It's going to be called Not Just Women's Issues. And so I want to say to Art today, thank you for being a wonderful mentor, a beautiful person. I will miss your voice each week when I wrote for you. Hello, Lydia. And just the exuberance he had every time when I submitted my article, and when he read it, he would say, thank you so much for writing this, and I really appreciate all that you've done to help this paper. So to Art's family, and Elaine, we have met and I've spoken with you over the past years. I'm sorry if I've woken you up at times when I've called very early. To Arthur, his son, and his grandchildren, and the entire family and friends, we're all going to miss him. And I miss him very dearly. And I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to know him. Thank you.
I've worked with Arthur at the paper for the last 13 years. And yes, quirky and, opinionated and all this stuff is true. The cars, oh my God, the cars. But one thing I want to share with everybody here is when you work with somebody, sit at desks right next to each other, you find out, we've heard all the gifts that Arthur has given us. When you sit next to somebody, you also hear what's so very important to him. Rotary, the Unitarians, the family, all those who have passed in front of him, he knew those were gifts too. We have definitely grown to know Arthur. he appreciated every one of you here. Thank you.
I wasn't planning to speak, but nobody's mentioned it. A lot of this room was inspired by art. This technology that we're sharing in today and those on Zoom actually speak to what Art was about in terms of sharing his message. And I have a little story of working with him, and it's an example of his humility. Now, compared to Art, I know nothing about anything. And somebody said Art could talk and you could have an 8-hour discussion about him. Well, as it so happened, in the first time we went live Zoom, Art was to speak about tribalism. And I was the tech to work with him to try to put that together in something that would be a much more condensed thing. And after a few days, we realized, Art and I together, he said, it's not going to happen. He had a college lecture, it was probably at least an hour long, and it was never going to fit. And he quite said, hey, Carl, we'll put it off to another time. And I thought, wow, he was that willing to accommodate any kind of change, any kind of thing that would come along. And he wrote letters for my wife. He done everything you could possibly imagine to help out in the true spirit of giving and humility. And so if we could commemorate even this space, at least the, call it the virtual space, I would say this is the Aldrich room.
Thank you to each and every one of you who shared a story or remembrance or a memory of Art. It really was a gift. Thank you. And now, will you please join me in a prayer of thanksgiving? Let the horizon of our minds include all the great family here on earth with us, those who have gone before and left us the heritage of our memory and of their work, and those whose lives will be shaped by what we do or leave undone. And together, let the congregation say, Amen. We will now join together in a hymn. In your hymnal, it is hymn number 6. It's titled, Just as Long as I Have Breath. The choir will sing it, but we'll sing it together with them. Hymn number 6.
Just as long as mine are these, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment beats me